going back to last year in the opens, how typically, I'm sure it changed a little bit, how many days were you practicing and when would you get into town for an open last year?
So I practiced like 3 to 4 days for each one of those. The only one that I practiced longer than that was on Smith Lake. I think I got 5 or 6 days in on Smith. And what I discovered is that was too much for me. And part of that was because the bite was pretty good at Smith. Like everywhere you went, you catch spotted bass is basically like, but whether or not it was over 2 pounds was kind of the bigger deal there. So I ended up having way too much stuff, and I ran around way too much the first day on Smith, and it kind of hurt me. But yeah, I'd say 3 to 4 was kind of the right number for me.
Sure. So it hasn't been a big adjustment for you to the elites, although you went from getting like closer to 4 days down to what, like 2.5 for the elites?
Yeah, and this year with COVID, they got like virtual meetings, so we're actually getting 3 full days now.
Okay.
Which is nice. That's about right, I think.
I feel like that is, I talked about this with somebody else. I feel like COVID, the one good thing could be the death of the pre-tournament meeting. Is like, if I don't ever have to go to another BFL or Bass Nation like pre-tournament meeting with 300 people, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's been pretty slick. We get like a YouTube video and it's about 8 minutes long and that's it.
Nice. That's awesome. Because a lot of guys, for the people that don't know, opens have official practices, but they don't have any cutoff. You can literally go there and camp for 2 months leading up to the tournament. And guys do that. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I think some of the Japanese guys last year that were in the running for the elites, I mean, they were there for a month at Grand, that last one. And so for me, that I get it. Maybe for them, they're, coming across seas, but for me, 3 to 4 days was about right.
Yeah, absolutely. You started out like last year. Was it Toledo Bend or Sam Rayburn's first one?
Yeah, Toledo Bend.
And you cashed a solid check there.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of your eye-opening, like positive learning moments? Like what talk about the things that like you're planning and things that went well and how it turned like some of that stuff from last season.
Yeah, so each one was kind of unique. Like Toledo, I actually had a pretty tough practice and I got stuck in a really bad blizzard in Kansas City and actually lost a day and a half of practice. So I think I only had 2.5 days down at Toledo for practice and it was really tough. And I ended up only having like 2 areas. And what I learned from that tournament is even with a tough practice, it's sometimes not the worst thing in the world because if you can still find 1 or 2 areas to hunker down into, then you sometimes can still be all right. And that was kind of the trend for me last year that I learned a lot about myself on these bigger lakes is that I still to this day have not perfected that run and gun technique. Like some guys are really good, like a Berman Thrift or Van Dam that can pull up to an area, make 5 to 10 casts, move on to the next, and they can do really well. And for me, I do way better when I actually hunker into an area and kind of learn it, whether that's on these bigger reservoirs, you're still looking at like 5 to 10 mile stretches for the most part, but you're not like making long 30, 40 minute runs between areas necessarily. And so for me, I've done way better when I can hunker into an area. And that was kind of a trend throughout all of the opens last year. Like when I won, and all my stuff was within like Horse Creek. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Grand, but Horse Creek is like one big general area mid-lake, and that's where all my stuff was. And so for me, that's kind of a learning. I'm still learning how to practice that way because you want to cover ground in practice, but you also don't want to spread yourself too thin. And I kind of started learning that on the Mississippi River a little bit. When I fished tournaments there, you can definitely spread yourself too thin if you're not careful. And so I don't know, that's probably one of the biggest things I learned last year through the opens.
Yeah. So Sycamore's got a good question that relates. In a 3-day practice, how many spots do you typically have? And in trying to judge like measure how many boats you see around you, and like whether you have to yourself or just kind of what's your typical experience?
Yeah, so in the opens, it's way different than the elites because you got like more than double the field in the opens. So, like in the opens, you almost kind of need more spots than you maybe would in the elites because there's better chance of guys being on your stuff. But you know, how many spots, man? That's so different depending on the tournament. Like Toledo, like I said, I only had like 2-3 areas. On Smith Lake, you know, I had 15 to 20 different areas that I could pull into. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like on Champlain, I basically stayed in the north end and primarily in the inland sea, and so that, you know, that's still a pretty massive area. But within that area, I maybe had 3 to 5 general spots I was running each day. And for me, like I practice, I don't want to need areas very long to fully learn them. And so I think I never fully know what I'm on until after the first day of the tournament in a lot of cases. I think that's I think that's maybe one reason why I've had better day twos. You know, like all the opens last year, I had better day twos than first day. And then this year in the elite, I've somewhat had that in the last couple of events. I think the last 3 events have had better day twos than day one. And I think one of my problems is I've tried to cover too much water on day one. I've tried to hit like a lot of stuff that I didn't practice, and then on day 2 I settle into an area, and then I do better. So there's a little bit of a trend there.